I'm Kristen and this is Kristen Craves Books. So I've been blogging since May 2017, so I'm not new to wrap-ups, but this is my first time filming one on video, so I'm curious to see how this goes. And last year, I was looking for some alternatives to Goodreads and I came across the Storygraph, which has been blowing up lately. So I'll link my profile down below if you want to follow me, and please share yours with me so I can follow you as well. But what makes the Storygraph so interesting is the stats that they give you. So I'm actually an early bird supporter and I'm volunteering to be a librarian. So I just love the mission. I love everything about the Storygraph. So I want to share my stats with you because they have monthly stats and you can compare different time periods. It's just so much fun and it's great to see. Always looking to discover my reading tastes and what I like and see how I can be pushed outside of my comfort zone, and the Storygraph is great for that. And there's also a great recommendation feature. Anyways, that's a whole other video I can do. But I'm just going to start off with the stats that they give you. So I've read 13 books in January, which totals 4,424 pages, which is pretty high for me. Normally I'm around 3,000 and something, so 4,000, almost 4,500 is a lot for me. And then they do this thing I'll show you here, where they sort the books by mood, which I think is just fun and clever. So as you can see here, the majority of the books I read, the highest mood is emotional, which isn't surprising because I do like books that hit me in the feels. You won't see me read a lot of funny books. There is one, but it makes sense. That's one of my favorite series and the kind of humor that I like in fiction. And then the next highest mood is mysterious, which is interesting because I think some of the books in there aren't classified as mysteries, but they do have a mysterious tone. Then the third highest one is adventurous, which is new for me, and I think it's because I'm reading more fantasy than I ever have before. And then the next stat they give you is pacing, and I would say most books are medium paced, so it's not surprising to see it so high. But I tend to read more slow-paced books, so the fact that I have an equal amount of medium and fast-paced books this year and not as many slow is something a little different for me. And then page number, I want to read more tomes this year, more books over 500 pages. So I got 2 in January, which is pretty good because I probably only read about 6, if that, a year. So 2 in 1 month is excellent for me. And you'll see quite a few books under 300 pages. I love books that are shorter because I think it's incredible what an author can do in so few words. But again, more fantasy. My page numbers are going to be higher because fantasies tend to be higher because of the world building and all that kind of stuff. Then we have fiction and nonfiction. And on my blog, I obviously did my favorite books of the year. And I think I did 15 books, and I think 6 or 7 of those were nonfiction, and I only read 16 or 17 nonfiction books in all of 2020. So that says something about how I feel about nonfiction, how it really works for me. So I need to prioritize it this year. So I read 2 so far, which I think is good. I'd like to get to 2 or 3 a month, so I'm happy with that. And then I read 5 young adult, which is high for me. But I get YA, fantasy. I've been leaning towards some of that lately. And there was some good YA contemporary that came out this month that I just had to read. And then I read 3 literary fiction, which is typically my favorite genre, but I neglected it in 2020. So I'm happy to see that. And then 3 fantasy, which again is high for me. And then other than that, nothing stands out. My average star rating was 3.98, which I say is pretty typical. I'm normally around 4, and if you can see here, it's a wide range of ratings. And another great feature of Storygraph is that you can do quarter ratings, half ratings. If I want to give the book 3.78 for whatever reason, I can do that, which is amazing. So that's all the stats that they give you on the Storygraph, and I highly encourage you to check it out because it's just a great mission, because it's just a great website, a great company. I love their mission, and I think it's a 3-man operation, which is incredible. So now we'll just get right into the books that I read in January. So I tend to start the year with a graphic novel. I don't know why that is. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I love to just finish a book on January 1st so that I feel like I've read something. And I thought this was appropriate since we're in the 20s, which hasn't been going great so far, but hopefully it starts to look up. And that is The Great Gatsby graphic novel. And this is gorgeous. I love the color palette in here. Show you some of it. There's something dreamy about it. It's more muted. The color tones, the illustrations are a bit more simple. My only complaint about the illustrations is that the male characters were hard to tell apart. Like, maybe you can see in this. I think that's Nick and Gatsby, but they have the same face. Like, other than the hair color, you couldn't tell them apart. And there are quite a few blonde men in this book, so that was my only struggle. And I always wonder, like, I love these books, these graphic novels where classics are translated into graphic novels, but I always wonder if you would get as much of them out of them if you hadn't read the original text. So I'm curious about that, because I don't know if I'd appreciated this one as much if I hadn't already read The Great Gatsby. So let me know what you think about that. And I think there's another illustrated graphic novel of The Great Gatsby that came out recently, so I'm curious about that one too. And this just went into public domain, so we're going to get some interesting retellings for The Great Gatsby that I'm really looking forward to, and I have a few on my TBR, so I'll share those with you eventually. And then I read one of the tomes. How many pages is this? I think around 600. It's Capote by Gerald Clark, and you can see I tabbed it, everything. And what's interesting is I'm more fascinated by Capote himself than I am by his books, with the exception of In Cold Blood. But I think why I like In Cold Blood so much is the history of it, how it changed nonfiction, and knowing Capote's personal relationships with the killers and what writing that book did to him, which really this book goes into. And if you've seen the movie Capote starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's based on this, but it's such a small part of this huge autobiography. And what's interesting is that Gerald Clark took 13 years to write this book, and he actually over that time formed a friendship with Truman Capote, and by the end of this book, Truman Capote passes away. So he has, with that comes this kind of bias, because they do have a friendship. So I'd be curious to see what an autobiography from somebody who completely has no relationship with Capote would look like. But I did feel like he was pretty honest about who Capote was, and the fact that he did know him personally added another layer to the story, or to his work. And yeah, it was fascinating. Capote was a really compelling guy. He was far from perfect, and this was written in the 80s, so I feel like some of the language hasn't aged very well, but it's definitely worth reading if you're at all curious about who Capote was as a person, because I think this is the one that most people recommend. Then I read my first 5-star read of 2021, and that is Legend Board by Tracy Dion. And I know I'm not alone in giving this 5 stars. It's so beloved, and I get it. It's so good. And I never thought I'd be into an Arthurian retelling. It's not really my kind of thing. And I've always seen mixed reviews about a lot of the ones that are available, but this does something really special. And I really appreciated Bree in this. She felt like a real teenager, and I understood all of her motives, even if I didn't agree with them at all the time. And the romance was sweet, but I liked that it was kind of in the background. This was more about Bree discovering herself, discovering more about her mother and her past and her history. And the ending of this left me with my jaw on the floor. This is just so well done. And if you like books set on campus, you're gonna like Legend Born. The magic system in here is incredible. There's some interesting side characters. Some I really love, some I can't stand, but that's intentional. And there's some, you know what's so great about this? It's so nuanced too. There's so many nuanced conversations from this. It's a lot going on here. There's a lot you could talk about with this. If you're in a book club, I think this is a good one. And I keep checking Goodreads to see if information about the sequel has been announced, but nothing yet. It says 2021, but no title, no cover. I check every day, I'm serious. And then we have one that I have a little bit of mixed feelings about, and that is Eat a Peach by David Chang. Now, I'm really starting to get into food memoirs, and this is one that has been recommended to me a lot. And I didn't know much about David Chang going into it. Like, I've seen some of his shows, and I've been to his restaurant in Toronto, but I didn't know a lot about him personally. I didn't realize when I picked this up that he's known for having a temper, and I don't think he created the greatest work environments, but he doesn't try to hide that in this. He talks about this, especially in the second half, and the things that he's doing to change, and he's reflecting a lot on the mistakes he made. So I thought that was interesting. And then I read an article by a former employee of his who was affected by the work environment that Chang created. So I think it's important to get both sides. But I did like this. And he has some interesting things to say. I always appreciate behind the scenes of the restaurant industry. I think that's compelling. But yeah, complicated feelings about this. I thought it was well written. I think Chang obviously is reflective and he's insightful. And he talks about his depression and him going to therapy. So there's some great things in here. But just know, like, it's important to know all sides of the story. So I think read this, then read the article, and then you have a more well-rounded view. But still, I recommend it. And then I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and she wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I just know that that one is a brick, and I've avoided it for years because I've been intimidated by it, but now I'm going to pick it up because this was so beautiful, and if this is not nominated for the Women's Prize, I'll be shocked. And I don't even know how to begin to describe Piranesi to you. I knew nothing going into it other than it was getting a lot of buzz, and I think that's the best way to go. It takes a while to really grasp the world and what's going on here, and you just kind of have to accept it and roll with it. But the story is being told through Piranesi's journal. He's writing to you as if you found his journal and you're reading his story. So that's really cool. So he's learning things about the world he's in, and his reality may not be what he thought it was. So we're learning that with him and getting his insight. It's just so well done. It's not very long. I highly recommend this. I really hope it's longlisted for the Women's Prize. And the last physical book I read, which I'm sure many of us read this year, is Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. You know, it's been years since I read The Hate You Give. It's on my favorite shelf. I got the collector's edition in gold. And I'm like, did I build that book up in my mind? Could it be as good as I thought I remember it being? And it is, because this book is incredible. The prequel is incredible. And actually getting Maverick's story, who is Star, the main character in Hate You Give, it's her father. So getting his story made me appreciate The Hate You Give even more. You understand Maverick's point of view and the way he is even more. And her mother as well, because Lisa, her mother, is in this book as well. And a lot of the characters that are in that are in this. So you get a deeper understanding of The Hate You Give. So I appreciate that book more, having read this one. And I like them equally. I couldn't pick a favorite. I think they're wonderful. And I do think you should start with Hate You Give and then read Concrete Rose, even though that this is a prequel. But yes, highly recommend. Incredible. I will read whatever Angie Thomas writes. I did listen to a few audiobooks, and I read an ebook or two. So the first one was Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, which is the 4th book in the Murderbot series. So I can't talk about it too much. And I know a lot of people love the Murderbot series, and for good reason. It's such a great series of novellas. Well, the first 4 novellas, so the next one that I have to read is actually a full-length novel, which I'm so excited about because I need more time with Murderbot. Who would have thought that an AI would be so relatable? All they want to do is sit around and watch TV. They hate emotions. But as the series goes on, they still say they hate emotions. They don't want to be around humans, but is that really true? They're slowly opening up, and it's just so incredible. And there's a predictability to these. Like, they all sort of feel the same. But that's what I appreciate about it. When I feel like I'm in a slump or I need something to cheer me up, I will pick up a Murderbot book because I know what I'm going to get. It's going to be funny, it's going to be adventurous, and I'm going to have a good time. Then the next audiobook I listened to was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. And this was sent to me, an ALC was sent to me thanks to Libro FM, domestic thriller, which are hit and miss for me, but I thought this one was okay. And I can't go too much into it without spoilers, but the twists that she did with Jane Eyre, I thought they were really, really clever. And in some ways it almost felt like a Rebecca retelling. If you've read this, did you feel that way too? And because of that, I felt there was some predictability to it. But she did do some interesting things. I like what she did with Jane's character. You have to suspend your disbelief, obviously. But I find that's true for a lot of these domestic thrillers. And the ending, I have mixed feelings about. But if I was gonna recommend a domestic thriller, this would be on that list. So I do think it's worth reading. Then the next audiobook I listened to was actually another one of this series, and I think it was a fourth book as well. It's In an Absent Dream by Shanann McGuire, and that is the fourth book in the Wayward Children series. And I think it's my favorite in the series so far. I've discovered that I prefer the prequels, which I think every other book in the series is a prequel, because I want to know the backstory. I want to hear about the world that these characters have entered. That's more interesting to me than them being at the school. It's more interesting for me to hear about the worlds that they were into and why they were perfect for that world and what happened there. In an Absent Dream follows Lindy, who I actually think is the most relatable of all the characters in the series so far. And I think many people will feel the same because we're readers. She's a big reader. She doesn't want to get married. She doesn't want to socialize too much. She just wants to learn and spend time with books and reading. So I thought there was something about her that I connected with. And then the world that she enters is a retelling of The Goblin Market, which I think is so original. I read The Goblin Market in high school, so it's been a long, long time. But you don't hear many Goblin Market retellings. And this actually made me want to go back and reread The Goblin Market, so I might do that at some point this year. But it was just dark, as these prequels often are, because a lot of these worlds are, even the happier ones do have this darker element to them. It's whimsical. It's everything that you hope for in this series, and I'm behind. So for some reason, I read one a year. I don't know what that is, but maybe I'll get to a few more this year because they do help me get out of slumps. I do like them for that, and maybe I'll read more from Shanann McGuire. I know lots of people have mixed feelings about Middle Game, but I'm curious. And is Mira Grant her pen name? I think so. So I'd like to read more from her. The next audiobook I listened to was Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant, and this is her debut, and I think it was incredible for a debut, and I can't wait to see what else she comes up with. And again, what I loved about Happily Ever Afters is that Tessa felt like a real teenager. This is a book that I would put into the hands of any teenager in my life because I think they would see themselves reflected in Tessa's characters in some way. And I read a lot of reviews that say they were frustrated with her, that she made poor decisions. And yeah, she did. She's a teenager. She's human. It all made I understood her so much. It all made so much sense to me. I think sometimes we forget what it's like to be 16 years old. But I can remember, and I think I would have made some of the same mistakes she made. But the growth in this is incredible. There's some nuanced conversations. Her older brother has cerebral palsy, so that comes into play. How people view him affects her. And that's an interesting discussion. And she goes to a school, it's like a creative arts school, high school. And the dynamics there are interesting as well. And she's got writer's block, she's a writer. And I don't know, I just thought it was great. I loved the love interest. And it was just a sweet book. I definitely really recommend it. 2 more audiobooks, and they were both ALCs. The first one was from Libro FM. It's First Comes Like by Alicia Ray, which I kind of talked about in my February releases because it comes out in February. I think February 23rd, but don't quote me on that. And it's the 3rd book in the Modern Love series by Alicia Ray. And I haven't read the first 2, but I want to go back and do that because I really thought this was great. It's over 400 pages. That's long for a romance for me. But we get so much of the characters' backstory. We understand who they are as people. We get their family dynamics. And it just makes them more well-rounded and interesting as characters. And the romance was sweet. That's the word I would use for it. And again, there's lots of great discussions in here. Dave is really respectful of Gia's boundaries. He's always cognizant of how things are going to look. And there's a lot of tropes in here that I personally love and I thought were handled well and done in a unique way. I'm always somebody who likes when one or more of the characters is famous. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it works for me. And in this one, Dave is a famous soap opera star from India who's moved to Hollywood, and Gia is a popular beauty influencer on YouTube. So I just thought that was fun. There's just so much to love in this, and I think a lot of people will really enjoy it. And the last audiobook I listened to this year was The Initial Insult by Mindy McGinnis, and I liked it. Mindy McGinnis is one of my favorite authors. I have Female of the Species on my favorite shelf. I love the way she does YA thrillers, mysteries. Her books are so dark. I really like The Female of the Species and Be Not Far From Me. I haven't read a ton of hers, but those are my two favorites so far. And I think The Initial Insults is the darkest of her work, but it's based on a Poe story, which I haven't read and don't have much knowledge of. So I think a lot of the nuance and references went over my head. So if you were a huge Poe fan, I think you're going to love this. And I went into it not realizing that it was a duology. So I expected all the questions I had to be wrapped up by the end, and I was left with more questions and answers, which is frustrating. But the sequel comes out in 2022, so I will definitely read that because I need to know what happens. And I haven't even told you what this is about, but it follows Tress and Felicity, who were best friends growing up, and then Tress's parents go missing while they were driving Felicity home one night. And Felicity doesn't remember what happened, but Tress believes that she does. So something happens at a Halloween party, and it goes from there. There's a lot going on in this one. It's interesting, and I do think it's worth picking up. And then my last read of the year was actually an e-arc, thanks to Simon & Schuster Canada and NetGalley. And this book comes out in March, I think. And it's Bruised by Tanya Bethaju, which is a YA contemporary that follows Dea, who's lost her parents in a car accident and has moved in with her aunt and uncle. And there's major trigger warnings for self-harm in this book because Bruised kind of hints at that, because Dea turns to the roller derby in order to get hurt, in order to get bruised, because that pain gives her a sort of relief, and it's a tough read in that way. But it's also a book about growth and development, and there's important conversations about therapy, and she's very resistant to help and to love, but there's people in her life that love her and fight for her, and it was really heartwarming and touching, and she really opens up throughout the novel. So I think a lot of people are going to take a lot away from this book when it comes out, and the roller derby aspect was fun. I knew nothing about the roller derby going into this, and actually at the back of the book, the history of roller derby, there's a little section about that, which was interesting. And the author does do a good job of explaining some of the rules and the terms throughout the book, because Dea is new to the roller derby as well, so you're learning along with her. And she's never been on a team before, so there's that, as she's learning to be on a team. And there's some great characters on her team. There's some great characters surrounding her. Her friend Fee is one of the most memorable characters. I think they will be on my list of favorite characters of 2021. There's something so sweet about them. They're supportive of Dea, but they will challenge her, and they have great banter, the two of them together. So I just love that friendship there. And there's just some great representation. It's just such a great book, and I can't wait for everybody to read it, and it doesn't hurt that it has an incredible cover. I would love to know if you've read any of these, if you have thoughts on any of these, if they're on your TBR, or what was your favorite book that you read in January, because I always love hearing what other people love. And if you've posted a wrap-up, please let me know, because I'd love to check it out. Once again, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you again soon with my February TBR. Bye for now.